Welcome to Twilight Fables, where the stories you thought you knew are reborn in shadow. Tonight, we begin the tale of Thumbelina, only this time, she isn't a delicate flower, but the final echo of life in a world drowning in ash. The soil had turned grey long before the sky gave up its colour. In a world that once bloomed in riotous colour, fields of tulips, meadows ablaze with sunflowers, apple orchards bursting with blush, there now lay only dust. Dust in the air, dust in the water, dust coating the cracked bones of long dead animals. Crops had withered, trees shed their bark like scabs, and the sun, once golden and kind, hung pale and brittle in the heavens like an old coin no longer in use. They called it the year of the last bloom. No one knew why the world began dying. Some said it was punishment. Others whispered of a spell gone wrong, or that the gods had turned away. Cities emptied, forests silenced, hope became currency, and prayer was its last coin. In the ruins of one such forgotten village stood a greenhouse, domed and glassy, like the skull of a giant insect. The world had choked outside it, but within its walls still lingered the humid scent of decay and memory. It was here that a woman knelt. She had no name anymore. Her husband had died coughing into a blood-spotted rag 3 winters ago. Her son, born still and wrapped in wilted linen, was buried beneath the lone birch tree that hadn't yet collapsed into rot. Now she lived alone in the husk of the greenhouse, feeding its bones with the water she hoarded in rusted pans, whispering to the vines that curled like veins along the glass. She had nothing left to give the world, but still she prayed. She prayed beneath the moonless sky, kneeling before a cracked stone planter filled with dead earth, and every night she placed her hands in the dust and whispered the same words. Give me one thing, just one. I don't care one hinky what it costs. She did not expect an answer, but the earth listens more closely when it knows it's dying. That night, as she slept, curled in a hammock of mouldy netting, something stirred in the planter. The soil twitched. A single bead of crimson dew rose from the dust and rolled to the centre, then another and another. By morning, the planter held not dirt, but a velvet darkness that pulsed faintly with warmth, and in its centre grew a flower. It was no common blossom. Its petals shimmered black-blue, like a bruise, trembling with life. The air around it warped slightly, as if the world itself bent to accommodate its presence. The woman stared, chest hollow, mouth dry. Then the flower moved. The petals peeled open with a sound like tearing silk. Inside lay a girl, no larger than a thumb, curled fetal in the bloom's cradle, her hair slick with sap, her skin shimmered pale as frost, and her lashes fluttered as if in dream. The woman reached in, hands shaking. When her fingers touched the girl's body, warmth surged up her arms, sweet and electric and ancient. She wept. She laughed. She did not question the miracle. She simply pressed the child to her chest and whispered, "I will name you Thumbelina." The girl grew, but not like normal children. She remained small, inhumanly so, even by the time she could speak in full sentences and sing lullabies in languages the woman didn't recognize. She had not grown an inch. Still, the woman loved her with a ferocity that bordered on madness. She built her a bed from an old walnut shell, lined with lamb's wool. Her dresses were stitched from dried flower petals, ironed flat beneath broken panes of glass. At night, they huddled together beneath a lantern fashioned from a jar and a firefly, speaking of dreams that could never be. The world outside the greenhouse withered further. Ash fell like snow. Travellers stopped passing through. The birch tree at the edge of the garden snapped one day during a windless dusk, and with it went the last bird's nest in the area. But Thumbelina thrived. She sang to the vines, and they lifted their shriveled heads. She touched the withered herbs, and their stems uncurled just barely. She whispered to the last surviving caterpillar, and it spun a cocoon of silk, so fine it looked like glass. The woman watched all this with awe and fear and growing uncertainty. "Where did you come from?" she asked one night, cradling Thumbelina in her palm. Thumbelina looked up with eyes that shimmered like wet moss. "You prayed? But to what?" Thumbelina smiled, and the warmth left the room for a moment. "To what listens." She began to change. It was subtle at first. She slept less, ate less. Then came the dreams. Thumbelina would wake screaming, soaked in sap, her mouth whispering words the woman could not translate. She'd sit in the flower planter for hours, silent, fingers buried in the soil like roots. One morning, the woman found a ring of black petals around the girl's walnut shell bed. They smelled sweet, but underneath was the faint copper scent of blood. The vines, once lively in her presence, began curling too fast. They'd wrap around furniture, choke the light bulbs. Once the woman awoke to find them coiled around her ankles. She burned them that night. Thumbelina watched, silent. "You're scaring me," the woman said. "I'm only doing what I was meant to," Thumbelina replied. "You asked for life, but not like this. There is no other kind." That night, a crack appeared in the greenhouse dome. It began as a hairline fracture, but by morning it had spread like lightning across the glass. Outside, the ash had thickened. The sun no longer rose. Only a dull, pulsing glow hovered on the horizon, red and sickly. Thumbelina sat by the cracked pane, staring out with unblinking eyes. "I have to go soon," she said. "Go?" the woman asked, horrified. "Where?" "To the place where the petals fall upward." "What does that mean?" Thumbelina turned. There was a wet sheen to her skin, like morning dew. but her expression was older than any child's. "It means the world is almost ready. I am the last petal, and when I fall, the bloom begins." By the end of the week, the jagged fissure had crept like a spider's leg across half the ceiling. The woman stuffed rags and resin into the split, but nothing held. At night, she swore she heard it breathing, soft damp exhales from a wound in the glass. And from outside, something watched, not with eyes, with knowing. Inside, Thumbelina changed further. She no longer slept in her walnut shell. She preferred the stone planter where she'd first bloomed. It had turned black around the edges, the soil glistening like oil. When the woman tried to scoop her up, Thumbelina clung to the soil and hissed. Not a sound a girl should make, but the shrill whisper of leaves rubbing together in windless dark. And still the woman loved her. She fed her syrup and honey drops. She told her stories about the sun, describing it with more hope than memory. She played Thumbelina lullabies on a cracked music box, though the child no longer responded to them. Sometimes Thumbelina just sat, unmoving for hours, vines threading gently around her limbs like a cradle built by hands unseen. But one night, the music box began to spin without being touched, and Thumbelina sang along in a voice that wasn't hers. Outside, the world began to die in stranger ways. The ash, once falling slow and grey, now clumped into dark slush. A man staggered into the village one morning, coughing and blind. His body was coated in fungal growths, shaped like petals. He collapsed before the greenhouse, hands reaching toward it, and decomposed within a day. Nothing natural should have decomposed so fast. The woman buried what she could in the garden's frozen edge. That night, Thumbelina asked, "Why do you do that?" "He was a man. He had a name. He deserves rest." Thumbelina tilted her head. "So do seeds. Yet you eat their children and forget their names." The woman flinched. "You're not a child." "I never was." The next day, Thumbelina grew. It happened while the woman slept. She awoke to find the girl standing on the table, no longer the size of a thumb, but that of a large doll. Her dress, once stitched from poppy petals, had split. Her limbs were longer, bonier, jointed wrong. Her eyes were wide, dark, wet. She didn't blink. "I'm becoming," Thumbelina said. "Becoming what?" Thumbelina turned toward the cracked glass. "The bloom, the final one." "You mean to leave me?" "I was never yours." By the third week, the greenhouse was no longer safe. Vines now grew overnight, massive, pulsating things, with thorned blossoms and mouths that twitched when you passed too close. They dripped nectar that hissed on contact with skin. The woman hacked at them daily with her father's pruning knife, though the metal rusted quicker than it should. Her hands blistered, her breath wheezed. She was getting sick. Still, she would not leave. She had promised to care for the girl, and if Thumbelina was becoming something monstrous, it was still her miracle. still her answer, but even the delusion began to crack when she discovered the bird. It was a thrush, or had been. Its feathers were half melted, replaced by fibrous tendrils. Its beak hung open, and inside was not a tongue, but a sprouting stalk. Thumbelina sat beside it, stroking its back. "Did you do this?" the woman whispered. Thumbelina didn't look up. It asked to sing again. "I let it." "You're killing everything." "No, I'm growing it differently." The greenhouse's light dimmed. The cracked glass filtered the sun, or what passed for it, into a sickly, reddish glow. The woman no longer ate. Her teeth ached. Her hair thinned. But Thumbelina thrived. She now stood at the woman's hip. Her skin glistened with chlorophyll veins, and her voice echoed faintly, even when her lips were still. She spoke less, and when she did, it was in that language only the soil understood. The woman watched her from across the greenhouse, huddled under blankets, woven from brittle moss. "Where are you going?" "There's a place beyond the roots," Thumbelina said, eyes still on the cracked glass. "A kingdom built from seed and silence. It's calling. I'm the final part. Don't leave me." Thumbelina turned at last. Her face was no longer a child's. It was ageless, symmetrical, beautiful in the way that made teeth ache. "You prayed for life," she said. "This isn't life." "It is. But life does not owe you kindness. It does not owe you shape or sweetness. Life is hunger, rebirth, expansion. I am that wish fulfilled." That night, Thumbelina bloomed. The woman woke to the sound of glass cracking, not shattering, but splitting, as if the sky had bent open. Above the planter, where the girl had once slept, there now hovered a great bud, swollen, luminous, breathing. Thumbelina stood beneath it, arms outstretched, vines wrapped around her legs, lifting her upward like offerings to an invisible god. "Please," the woman wept, crawling toward her. "Stay." Thumbelina looked down. For a flicker of a moment, something soft returned to her eyes. "You gave me life," she said, "and for that I will spare you the bloom." Then she vanished inside the flower, and the dome cracked open. The dome shattered in silence. It did not crash or fall, but folded outward like the petals of a glass flower, blades, curling into the sky, then dissolving into nothing. The woman cowered beneath the table, blood slicking her forearms from where a single shard had kissed her. But the pain didn't matter. She dared to look up, and for the first time in months, the sky was not grey. It was bleeding colour. Crimson petals drifted down from an impossible height. They didn't fall like ash or snow. They spun like dancers, each one pulsing faintly, as if carrying breath. When they touched the soil, things moved. Buried roots stirred. Mould shifted its hue. Dead branches moaned in slow, fibrous delight. At the centre of it all, the great flower, where Thumbelina had vanished, remained suspended above the broken planter, roots now trailing beneath it like black silk. It pulsed once, and from its heart something tore free. Thumbelina stepped out, but she was no longer Thumbelina. She was tall now, though not fully human in shape. Her body was impossibly delicate, skin paper thin and veined with gold. Her hair was a mass of vines threaded with blossoms that blinked like eyes. Her hands had become too many, 6 limbs of different lengths, ending in fine petal-like fingers that constantly moved, tasting the air. Her eyes, though, they were still hers. Somehow, they still held that mossy glimmer, though now set in sockets that glowed faintly from within. She turned her gaze on the woman and smiled. "You're still here." The woman, bleeding and weeping, nodded. "I loved you," she whispered. "I still do." "I know." Thumbelina descended from the air without walking. The vines beneath her lifted her gently, a throne with no roots. She touched the woman's cheek with fingers warm and soft and wet. "You made me," she said, "and now I must unmake." The world did not end that day. It began to remake itself. From the cracked soil, new growth emerged, violently, hungrily, not green, but slick and dark. Roots fat with memory. Trees sprouted overnight, but their leaves were bone pale, their bark textured like coral. Flowers bloomed with petals, shaped like tongues, and they sang when the wind passed. Animals returned, but wrong, deer with many eyes, birds with mirrored feathers, a fox that whispered to itself in a child's voice. The woman wandered the village in a daze, watching life return in twisted forms. Her neighbours' houses were choked with ivy. Those who had died now stood in gardens as shrines of flesh and bark, half consumed by the new world's hunger. She stayed close to the greenhouse ruins, which had become a palace. No walls remained, only an open-air throne made of bone-white trees and suspended roots, and at its centre sat Thumbelina, no longer child, no longer girl, no longer bound to anything human. Creatures came to her, not to worship, but to report. A stag with roses blooming from its antlers, a woman whose mouth had been replaced by a hummingbird's beak. They knelt, offered gifts, memory-laden bones, half-dreams, preserved seeds. Thumbelina touched each one gently, whispered to them, sent them away. The woman watched from afar, unseen. She still called her Thumbelina, though no one else did. They called her the Last Petal. It was on the 12th night of the new growth that the woman saw something that chilled her. The vines were spreading far beyond the ruins, up hills, through forests, across dried riverbeds. At first, she had believed the bloom would be contained, that Thumbelina would remake this place, and only this place. But life is not still. It does not confine itself. It spreads. She confronted her beneath the throne. "Please," the woman said. "Stop." Thumbelina's head tilted. "Why?" The world wasn't ready. It's not ready. You're remaking it in your image. In your image, Thumbelina corrected. You made me. You prayed for life. Not like this. There is no other kind. The woman dropped to her knees, fists pressed to her temples. I only wanted a child, and I only wanted to grow. We both got what we wanted. Thumbelina reached out then, placed a hand on the woman's head. You are not to blame. You are simply the first gardener. That night, the woman made a choice. She walked until the earth turned dry again, until the trees no longer moaned in sleep, and the air no longer carried petal dust. There, she found a rotted chapel, its bell broken, its floor sagging with mould. She broke inside and found what she needed. A book, a blade, a name older than prayers. She slit her palm, drew the sign on the floor, lit a candle made of tallow and regret, and she called to the ones who had watched the world die once before. I planted the wrong seed, she said. I want it pulled. The blood on the chapel floor sizzled. It should not have sizzled. The sign the woman had drawn, an ancient spiral wrapped around a closed eye, glowed faintly where her palm had bled across the rotting floorboards. Wax ran in crooked rivulets, hissing as it touched the soaked wood. The air grew dense, filled with the scent of rust and jasmine. The woman knelt, exhausted. Her bones ached from days of walking, and the sickness in her lungs had begun to settle deeper. But she stayed upright, whispering the name she had found in the margins of a forgotten psalm. Drithar. The name had not been meant to be spoken aloud. Something shifted beneath the chapel, not beneath the floorboards, beneath the world. The floor cracked, fissures opened like wounds, revealing dark, knotted roots, huge veinous things that pulsed faintly with colour. One of them twitched toward her, coiling in the shape of a question mark. She swallowed, throat dry. I gave life to a bloom that cannot stop growing. It will consume everything. The root pulsed once, then again. You are not its mother, came a voice, not in the air, but inside her chest. It vibrated through her bones. I prayed for her, I raised her, I loved her. And now you seek to end her? I want to give the world a choice. There was silence, then a final pulse. Then we will give the world the knife. Far away, Thumbelina stirred. She stood at the edge of the vine throne, watching the horizon. The world had changed swiftly, too swiftly for balance. Mountains now bore forests of bone flowers. Rivers glowed with phosphorescent nectar. The moon itself appeared to blink sometimes, as though uncertain whether it still belonged in the sky. Creatures gathered around her. They murmured in sounds made not with mouths, but movement. Wing flutters, root pulses, scent trails. She nodded to each, sending them west, then north, then deeper into the soil. But she paused when the wind changed. It carried an old smell, a familiar one. Smoke, candle wax, grief. She stepped down from her throne and walked barefoot into the moss. It opened beneath her feet like a curtain, revealing the path the woman had taken. She calls to something old, Thumbelina murmured. A creature like a weeping tree leaned down beside her. She sows death. Thumbelina smiled faintly. No, she remembers it. The woman awoke outside the chapel, lying in a ring of frost. Her breath rose in white puffs. Around her, the trees stood still. No more petal drifts, no more vines. For the first time in months, the world was quiet, but silence can be a warning. In her hands, wrapped in dried lily leaves, was the knife. It was carved from something older than bone. Its edge shimmered in a way the eye couldn't fully track, like it shifted in and out of reality. Along the handle were etched runes she could not read, but her hands understood them. It was a root cutter, made to sever the source. She stood, body trembling. "Where do I cut?" she asked aloud. The forest rustled, not wind, but thought. Where she began, the greenhouse ruins awaited her. The glass was gone. The bones of the frame now bore fruit, strange hanging pods shaped like hearts, each dripping sap that smoked when it touched the ground. The throne was empty. Vines still pulsed slowly, like something sleeping, and at the centre, the great flower still floated above the soil, its petals now darkening to deep wine red, nearly black. Thumbelina had not yet returned. The woman stepped forward. The ground trembled beneath her feet. The planter, where the seed had first been planted, was now a crater filled with pulsing vines, spiralling in a wide helix. At the core, a root the width of a tree trunk, rising slightly above the soil's surface. She raised the knife. The vines around her reared up like snakes, shrieking in rustling horror, but none touched her. She dropped to her knees and whispered, "I'm sorry," then drove the blade downward. The scream that followed was not sound, it was memory. The earth convulsed, the vines writhed, the fruit pods on the throne exploded in bursts of thick, rotting mist, and the flower above the planter shuddered, vomiting petals into the air like sparks. Thumbelina returned in an instant. She did not descend. She arrived, as if the air had folded and deposited her. Her face was no longer calm. Her eyes were wild. "What have you done?" The woman turned, hands bloodied from the knife. "What I must." Thumbelina approached. Her many limbs trembled. "You severed the anchor. I gave the world its will back." Thumbelina fell to her knees. Her body shimmered, fading between forms, child, woman, root, bloom. "I was only ever what you asked me to be," she whispered. "A world that would not die." "But nothing can live without end," the woman replied. "Even flowers wilt, even love turns." Thumbelina looked at her, and for the first time she wept. Her tears were golden. The vines began to rot. All around them, the overgrowth that had spread across the valley blackened, curling inward. The strange animals screamed, one final, echoed wail, as their forms unravelled. Trees fell, not as dead wood, but as dreams collapsing, the sky paled, the sun returned, faint and small, but steady. The bloom overhead crumbled, scattering its last petals, and Thumbelina collapsed into the woman's arms, small again, as she had been, fragile, dying. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," the woman said, holding her close. "Me too." The sun returned like a stranger. It hung low in the sky, distant and thin, casting weak rays over the ruined land. The vines that once pulsed with stolen life had rotted to brittle threads. The trees remained still, silent, skeletal silhouettes of what they had been beneath Thumbelina's reign. The air was cooler. It no longer thrummed with whispers. The woman sat beneath what remained of the planter's frame, Thumbelina curled in her arms. The girl had not spoken since the bloom collapsed. She was small again, barely the size of the woman's hand. Her golden veins dimmed to a faint glimmer. Her chest rose and fell in slow, uneven breaths. Her hair no longer shimmered with life, but lay flat, dry, and brittle as paper husk. And still the woman held her. She cradled Thumbelina close, humming softly, not a lullaby, but a melody from her own mother, a song from when the world still made sense, when flowers bloomed for their own sake, and the sky didn't need permission to be blue. She did not know what Thumbelina was anymore. Child, seed, curse, blessing, but she had been hers, and that was enough. The creatures had vanished, the deformed deer, the whispering birds, the creatures born of dream and bloom, gone. Their absence left a hollowness in the air, as if reality had exhaled. The forest was quieter than it had ever been. Even the insects had not returned. But from the earth, a new kind of life began to stir. Not lush, not enchanted, but real. Tiny green sprouts broke through the soil like shy fingers testing the light. Moss crept across the bones of the throne. A bird, a real one, mottled grey with a cracked beak, landed near the planter and pecked uncertainly at the ground. It chirped once, surprised at the sound of its own voice. The woman smiled at it through her tears. "We're starting over," she whispered. Thumbelina woke on the third day. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, pupils like drops of ink spreading through water. She blinked up at the woman, then tried to sit up. Her limbs trembled too much to move. "You saved me," she said, her voice hoarse. "No," the woman said gently. "I unmade what was never supposed to grow." Thumbelina's eyes filled with tears. "Then what am I now?" The woman stroked her hair, feeling the dry strands catch on her fingers. "You're what's left." That night, Thumbelina told her what she remembered, not from her time as a child, nor as the last petal, but from before. "I was part of something deep," she whispered, curled in a nest of cotton scraps. "Not dead, not alive, just waiting." Waiting for what? A call, a prayer. You were the voice, I was the answer. The woman stared at the cracked ceiling. tears drying on her cheeks. I didn't know what I was asking for. I didn't know what I was. They fell silent. Then Thumbelina added, I think there are others. The woman looked down sharply. Others like you? Thumbelina nodded. Buried, dormant, in the soil, waiting. The wind outside shifted. The old bones of the greenhouse creaked. The next morning, Thumbelina could no longer move her legs. They had begun to stiffen, turning grey, cracking at the knees. The woman peeled back her bedding and saw faint, root-like lines travelling up her thighs. Thumbelina touched them without fear. I'm returning, she said. No, it's not death, not really, just going back. The woman wept as she carried Thumbelina outside. The field where the vines had once danced was now plain earth, damp and broken, but breathing. She dug a hole with her bare hands, tearing her nails bloody. Thumbelina lay inside it, blinking up at her. I wanted to stay, she whispered. You were never meant to. I still remember your lullabies. The woman pressed her forehead to Thumbelina's. And I'll remember your bloom. She buried her beneath the sky, and the earth accepted her, not in hunger, but in forgiveness. The seasons began to return. Spring was faint, uncertain, like a candle relit with trembling fingers. But the trees budded, the birds sang, grass pushed through the dirt with determination. The woman stayed near the greenhouse, rebuilding it, not with glass but wood and wire. She tended to the soil. She slept beneath the stars. Sometimes she dreamed of vines, but they no longer terrified her. She knew Thumbelina was still there, not growing, not speaking, but watching, resting, waiting. And for the first time in a long while, the woman felt something that might have been peace. Years passed, not measured by calendars or celebrations, but by seasons gently returning. Spring brought stubborn sprouts. Summer offered dry heat and skittish bees. Autumn whispered again with golden leaves, and winter no longer meant death, just stillness. The world had not healed, not entirely, but it had remembered how to breathe. The woman aged, her hair silvered, her hands calloused further, but she was not alone. The garden had changed. It didn't bloom with the riotous colours of fairy tales or fables. No enchanted roses, no glowing lilies, but there were hardy stalks of wheat, patches of moss, thick enough to walk barefoot on, crooked sunflowers with too many heads, and small trees, each bearing only a single fruit. She named the orchard after Thumbelina, not aloud, only to herself. Each day she walked the perimeter, hands behind her back, eyes to the sky. She no longer cried, she no longer prayed, but she spoke to the soil, the roots, the wind. She read aloud, sang lullabies, asked questions no one answered. Yet when she paused mid-sentence, the breeze would sometimes carry on the rest. One morning, a traveller came. It was the first in years. He was gaunt, wrapped in patchwork fabric. His eyes darted constantly. When she invited him to sit by the fire, He hesitated, then asked a strange question. Did you see them? See who? The flowers that used to move, that bled, that spoke. The woman stirred the pot quietly. Once, they say, something bloomed here that tried to eat the world. She didn't reply. The traveller leaned closer. Is it gone? No, she said gently. She went to sleep. The man swallowed and left before nightfall. That night, the woman dreamed of the greenhouse again. It stood in full bloom, glass-domed and perfect, reflecting starlight in thousands of glimmering shards. Inside, the air was warm, sweet, and in the centre, growing in the planter, was Thumbelina, small, smiling, not monstrous, not divine, just a girl, humming to herself as she watered a patch of mushrooms with glowing caps. The woman stepped inside. Her limbs were light, her breath clean. Am I dreaming? She asked. Thumbelina looked up. No. Then what is this? A memory you haven't made yet. The woman knelt. Are you still there, beneath the soil? I'm everywhere now. She reached out, and their fingers touched. The dream held for a moment, then faded. Something had changed in the orchard. One of the trees, one that had never borne fruit, now held a single blossom, not a fruit, a flower, dark red, petals waxy and soft. The woman approached with reverence, breath caught in her throat. When she touched it, the centre unfurled, and within was a tiny figure, no larger than a thumb. It was not Thumbelina, not exactly. This figure had different hair, skin like copper, tiny wings curled like fern fronds. The woman cradled her in her palm. The child blinked slowly, then smiled. Did you call me? She whispered. The woman shook her head. No, she said, but I remember how. By autumn, more blossoms arrived, each on a different tree, each with a different child nestled inside, all tiny, all impossibly alive. Some had scales, others had antennae. One glowed faintly in the dark. The woman didn't raise them. She simply watched. She learned. These were not daughters, not clones, not copies of Thumbelina. They were echoes, not of the Last Petal's power, but of her choice to return to the earth instead of consuming it, to grow in rest, to seed gentleness into the soil. The woman built a sanctuary for them, tiny houses carved into gourds, beds of moss and cotton, a cradle of woven grass hung from the old greenhouse frame. She left offerings of nectar and music. She never tried to name them. One day, a child asked, "Why do you stay?" The woman sat beneath the birch stump, now covered in vines. I was the first gardener, but the bloom is over. She looked at the cracked soil, the crumbling dome, the trees that still held memory in their roots. Nothing's ever over. It just changes form. That night, she lay down for the last time. The wind whispered through the garden. The stars blinked overhead, and somewhere beneath the earth, the old roots stirred, not in warning, but in welcome. She felt her breath slow, her vision dim, but before the dark took her, she heard a voice, small, familiar, sweet. "I remember your lullabies." She smiled and bloomed. The woman's grave was shallow, not out of neglect, but intention. She had asked the children of the garden not to bury her deep. "Let the roots find me," she'd said in her final days, voice creaking like dry bark. "Let the soil know I've come home." And they honoured her wish beneath a bent arch of willow and tangled honeysuckle. The orchard children, no longer tiny, but grown in their own strange ways, dug a soft pit and wrapped her in woven grass. They placed her in the earth with petals, with honey, with the last lullaby she'd hummed. Then they wept, their tears watering the soil above her. And when the wind came, it carried her name into the trees. She had not been their mother, not exactly, but she had been the first hand, the first voice, the first wound and the first balm. They called her Seed Mother. What grew from her burial was not a tree. It was a structure, neither plant nor stone, something like a rib cage grown upright, woven from roots and memory. Its bones hummed in the moonlight. Vines circled it protectively. The children nested within its hollows. At night, the walls whispered her stories. The sanctuary became legend, not to humans who had forgotten the bloom long ago, but to the others, the quiet ones, the small ones, the half-born and never named. They came with soft wings, stitched eyes, hollow chests. They crawled through the cracks of dying cities and found their way to the garden. They buried their dead beneath the birch stump. They left songs pressed into bark, and they listened, because sometimes, when the wind passed through the ribs of the Seed Mother's shrine, it spoke. "Remember what life really is," it would whisper. "Not perfection, not power, but roots, far away in the mountains." A child, born with moss in her hair and no memory of her parents, knelt in the soil and felt something stir, not in her body, in the earth. A hum, low and familiar. She reached into the dirt and pulled free a seed, dark, pulsing, warm. She did not ask what it was. She simply planted it. Elsewhere, on the edge of a dying sea, a woman stood barefoot at a graveyard's edge. She had never heard of Thumbelina. She'd never seen a petal that bled or a vine that whispered. But she wept, and the wind carried her grief like pollen. And somewhere beneath the ground, something heard. A root twitched. A memory opened. A choice was offered. In time, the world learned balance again. The flowers did not sing. The vines did not devour. But the echo remained, subtle, hidden in the dirt, and in lullabies passed down without names. Some mothers gave birth to small things, things that grew sideways, things that hummed in sleep and bloomed in rain, and instead of fear, they offered soil, shelter, silence. Somewhere in the dream space between bloom and rot, Thumbelina stirred, not in pain, not in awakening, but in continuation. The garden still grew, and every root remembered the first call. Beneath the shrine of the seed mother, something pulsed, not a heart, not quite. It was a knot of root and memory, bound in lightless soil, quiet, patient. It did not beat like a living thing. It listened, absorbing every footstep, every breath, every lullaby whispered in the orchard above. From time to time, the roots unfurled like antennae, brushing through the dark, seeking echoes, not for more power, not to bloom again, but to remember, because memory, if tended, becomes seed. The orchard continued to change. The children, born from soil, dream, and echo, had taken up the woman's work, but they did not call themselves gardeners. That was too small a word now. They were keepers. They taught the wind to hum. They taught mushrooms to carry stories in their spores. They taught the leaves to fall in ways that warned of danger, of storm, of sorrow. Each did it differently, some through spoken word, others through silence. Some had wings, some had none. A few shimmered out of phase with the world, flickering between now and what was. And one, the smallest, did not speak at all. She only carried a stone, smooth, oval, the colour of clotted nectar, tucked in a pouch at her hip. She would sit each morning at the base of the old birch stump, stone in hand, and listen, not to voices, to vibrations, whispers too deep for hearing, the kind of language the dead might use if they had learned how to hope again. On the day the sky fractured, the roots stirred again. It wasn't the same as before, not like when Thumbelina had bloomed and the world twisted into something unrecognisable. No, this fracture was faint, a shimmer, a hairline crack in the silence that had hung since the seed mother's passing. The keepers felt it in the rustle of leaves, in the way shadows bent under the orchard trees, and they gathered, not in panic, but in readiness. They stood in the circle where the woman had been buried, hands interlocked, some trembling, some steady, and in the soil beneath them, the knot of memory beat once, soft but unmistakable, and a petal rose. It was small, red as dusk, no voice, no light, just a single bloom, growing from the very centre of the grave. Its edges were curled, imperfect, as though sculpted by uncertain hands, but it was alive. The keepers approached slowly. The smallest one, the girl with the stone, stepped forward. She knelt. The flower did not retreat. Its petals twitched once, as if recognising her presence. She touched it, and it opened. Inside, there was no child, no creature, no seed, only a memory. The air filled with scent, honey, soil, sorrow. And then the voice came, not through air, not through ears, but through everything. I remember your lullabies. They fell to their knees, not in worship, in grief, in relief, in recognition, because the voice was not Thumbelina's alone. It was the woman's, the seed mother's, the thousands who had come and gone and given themselves to the soil, willingly or not, all layered in a single blooming phrase. "We are still growing." The girl with the stone placed it gently inside the bloom. The petals closed around it, and the roots below pulsed again, 3 times. A beginning. The world did not change overnight, but something shifted across distant lands, in the ruins of cities long forgotten. Vines stirred in cracks, flowers bloomed in rusted gutters, mourners woke with songs they didn't remember learning, and those who listened closely enough began to hear the hum, a deep, old sound, the heartbeat of something that had once been feared, now gentle, now quiet, now ready. And far beneath all things, in the dark where soil dreams, the last petal rested, not alone, not waiting, but rooted forever.